Hello, I am Alexandria Harvey, member of National Affairs Series and Committee on Lectures. It is my great honor to introduce our speaker this evening and once again thank the Iowa Environmental Council for sharing him with the students of Iowa State. As the president of the Freshwater Trust, he and his team focus on cooperative, market-based solutions that benefit rivers, working lands, and local communities. With more than 20 years of experience, his focus is on the next generation of conservation tools that can leverage technology and finance to accelerate the pace and scale of restoring freshwater ecosystems. A patent inventor and an American Leadership Forum Senior Fellow, he was also founding board chair of the Council for Responsible Sport. Throughout his career in the Pacific Northwest, he has served as a formal advisor on issues ranging from agriculture, climate, finance, salmon, and water at both the state and regional levels. He holds a law degree from Lewis and Clark College and an undergraduate degree from Dartmouth College. When not exploring new water, Portland, Oregon serves as his home base. We're all excited to hear the details of this new approach to water restoration. Please join me in welcoming Joe Whitworth.
Thank you, Monica and Alexandria, and also the National Affairs Series for having me here tonight. It's been a while since I've been in Iowa. I missed it occasionally. I didn't miss it all the time, but I certainly missed this weather. It's raining in Portland, Oregon, as it will now until next June. So, as Alexandria noted, my name is Joe Whitworth. I'm the head of the Freshwater Trust, which means, for a living, I fix rivers. And our group's been based in Portland, Oregon for the last 3 decades, and what we focus on is fixing not just our own home waters, but we have, over the last several years, started to get more interested in building the tools that can allow us to fix all the waters, everywhere. And while I started there 13 years ago, actually, as I'm putting on these glasses, I realized I had to wear these when I first began at the Freshwater Trust to make it look like I was older than I was. And now I have to wear them to actually look at all. So, times change all things. But my journey to this stage truly began more than 4 decades prior to that, even starting at the Freshwater Trust, about 130 miles south of here in a soybean field with my grandfather. And it has a lot to do with this thing. Does anybody know what this is? Have you ever seen one of these? What is this? Highest yield, yeah. It's called a corn bell. And my grandpa, Herbie Whitworth, won several of these during the Second World War for 81 bushels an acre, which is about half of what you guys get here in Iowa. But, it was Missouri, so what do you want? And so to him, those meant a great deal. And he saw that as he was a good farmer. He took care of his land. He took care of his family. He made the most of his lot, and he was really keeping up his end of the bargain. And more than that, this bell I keep in my office because it reminds me of something that he taught me when we were walking through those bean fields. And he said several times when I was a little boy that no man has the right to take more from the land than the land itself can withstand. No man can take more from the land than the land itself can withstand. And what he meant by that, as I've come to know, is that commerce and stewardship are forever entwined, right? Prosperity really means taking care of both of those things, not one or the other. And as I grew up, I went out into a world that didn't necessarily agree with that. In fact, the world told me over and over that those two things are not only separate, when they do come together, they're generally at war. Now, that's never really sat well with me. And each time that I see us bumping up against the outer limits of our natural resources, which we're doing more and more often these days, I always think of my grandpa's words as probably the best long-term bet that's out there. Now, if you're a conservationist and you're standing on a stage, you want to talk about, long-term bets with natural resources, it's really easy to get up and just bemoan the current state of affairs. And you guys generally all know that. Many of the people that I end up talking to already do know that, so I'm not going to focus on that. What I'm going to focus on is how close we are to actually cracking this code. If I don't screw up the AV. So, start with the basics. The most basic of all basics is water, right? These images tell a pretty clear picture, or tell a pretty clear story of our planet. It's a fragile place in an otherwise hostile, desolate universe. And if you took the one that is closest to me, that little blue ball represents all of the water on Earth. All of it. Salt water and fresh water. Okay? If you were to take that in the shape of the United States and make a lake, it would be 97 miles deep. That's the salt and the fresh water. If it was just the fresh water component, how deep do you think that lake would be? Any guesses? It's more than an inch. Come on. A foot? 1 foot across the U.S.? It'd be 3 miles deep, which is a lot less than 97 miles deep, right? And so what this says is our biosphere, we don't have a lot of it, right? It is the ultimate closed system. We don't have any more water today than the day that Earth opened up for business. No change at all. What has changed is the quality and character of the water, as well as the quantity when that water shows up. And that is due exclusively to the manipulation and impact of that resource by humans. It's not up for question. We are the ones that have changed how the water works in our entire world. Now, the pink ball on the left is the Earth's atmosphere. And there's not much of it. I'm no climate scientist, but I can say there's not much of it. This isn't designed as a climate talk, and so I'm not going to speak to that too much, but a few key words here: drought, flood, violent weather patterns, and increased frequency. That's all I'm going to say about that. But so we have very little protecting life on planet. Big deal. Still works. It's worked for a long time, right? Well, there is a fairly big debate about that. And this graphic, which I don't have a shooter, but you can all see that blue box down in the lower left corner. That blue box it represents a consumption rate that is across the line, what is essentially the UN's quantified poverty line, if you will. It's a lower standard of living, but these are the developing nations out here, and they're all trying to get into the box, over that line. Above the line, over the line, but moving up, those are the developed nations that are beginning to start thinking about innovating to get down into that box, so that you are above a poverty line internationally, but you're below the carrying capacity of the earth. Now, what's striking to me in this is today we have nobody in that box. So that's not good. Now, quick show of hands. Who here thinks, who says it's all good, we're okay? Anybody? Who says we're totally screwed? Who says we're going to have to do more with less? Okay. All right. So the guy that gave me this slide, or the guy that I stole this slide from, would probably agree with all of those statements, with one caveat. And that caveat is that in order to get there, we're going to need to track the debits and the credits that lead us to the right decisions. We do it every day with our checkbooks, we do it every day with our business ledgers, and we need to start doing it every day with our environment. Now, that guy, Malcolm Preston, is the head of global sustainability for PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is the world's biggest accounting firm. So he is admittedly a debits and credits kind of guy. But what he saw is if we can do that and move everybody over there and move those folks down there, what you're going to get is, in his words, the demand for innovation that's going to be required for the food, for the water, for the shelter, for the energy of a vast, vast middle class is the biggest economic opportunity in the history of humankind. Now, for water, that has special implications, which until now have largely been hidden from view. So these are some products that you're all pretty familiar with, and their associated water footprint, the number of gallons that it took to get those products to market for you to use. So if you have on blue jeans, I'd like you to stand up. Anybody in this room have blue jeans? Everybody stand up. Okay. Anybody who has a pair of blue jeans at home, I'd like you to stand up. Really? You guys don't have any no blue jeans for you? You don't have blue jeans? Are you kidding me? Do you have a cotton dress? Okay, if you don't understand, you're the only person here. But what this means is, and you guys can all sit down. I'm not going to make you do jumping jacks. I do that with the sixth graders, right? There is no consumer good on earth that does not have a water component. No exceptions. There is water in everything, in making everything. Okay? We just don't think about it, right? And so how does that affect trade? Right? When you engage in trade, you give something, whether it's crops or pigs or whatever it may be, you get something in return. Generally, it's money. But we also give up all the things that we don't see. Things that go untracked. Debits that go unchecked. And in our case, with regard to rivers and water, we are racking up some pretty serious debts. And so in order to change that, the first thing we've got to do is we have to be able to track it, and then we have to start understanding the trade-offs that we're making. So the United States is today the third largest exporter of water in the world. You guys probably would have liked to have had some of that, which month? Generally each August, but last year for sure, right? So often we export mostly through our grains and our feeds, right? Now often that goes to create meat for developing nations whose diets are beginning to change. They're starting to have more and more meat for dinner, right? Developing countries, all they really want to do, they want to eat chicken and they want to drive a car. And we're not going to stop them from doing that. We won't be able to do that. Not by all the world of finger wagging. And so, but the difference, taking China, for an example, the difference that China had in beef consumption from 1985 to 2009, just the difference is equal to all of the water use in Europe annually. And they're just getting started. Now, I want you to think for just a moment about that, what it means for your water supply, your drinking water supply, your water supply for water, for irrigation in Iowa and beyond. Just start thinking about that. And the impacts are only going to be going up. Now, has anybody in the audience had a birth in your family in the last 6 months? What's the name of the kid? David? All right. So So David, not to exclude everybody else, but I'm going to go with David because I can probably remember that name and I'm going to need it later. You guys are a pretty sober crowd. That was a laugh line. So by the time David has a child, we will need to produce more food than we have in the entire history of agriculture on Earth. Okay? And then we're going to have to do it year after year after year after year after year. From when David's kid, so when his kid heads to kindergarten, we're going to have to do that. Graduates high school, we're going to have to do that. Goes to college, maybe at Iowa State. Probably. Has he got the grades? Well, we don't know. He's like 6 months old. So, all the way to the nursing home, right? And all of his kids and grandkids every year, okay? This is not a this quarter or this year, this yield issue. But we're treating it like that, okay? And so, if we continue to treat it that way, and if we fail to properly account, we're going to absolutely destroy David's water supply and our own ability to produce food thereafter. This is the kind of thing that we've got to get out in front of, and right now, we're just not. It's going to mean a lot of changes. It's going to mean a lot of changes for everybody, and because I believe in pointing thumbs before I start pointing fingers, I put my own community, the environmental community, at the top of the list that needs to change. Now, the poet Wallace Stevens once wrote that after the final no, there comes a yes. And on that yes, the entire world depends. My take on that quote is that unless environmentalism change, and unless conservation change, it will be regarded by history as a big idea that never really amounted to much. Now, I've been fixing rivers for quite a long time, since I was evidently a young man, right? And what I've come to realize is a pretty simple thing. The old way, the old ways are no longer working. We need more results on the ground and in our waters than we need rules on the books. If we want clean water in this country in the long term, we've got to radically accelerate the pace and the scale of restoration right now. Pace and scale. Pace and scale. In order to get those two things, we need the right tools for the job. Now, we have built some of those tools in the Pacific Northwest, and getting these tools to scale is what I want you to think about as I continue on here. To get there, you got to understand a little bit about how conservation has worked, and then you'll begin to understand about how it doesn't work anymore. So, few visual cues say we are off track like a river on fire, right? That's a fair point. Now, in 1969, the year that I was born, this image of the Cuyahoga River in Ohio enraged a nation. Does anybody remember this picture? Have you seen this before? Do you remember what it made you feel like or think? You were scared? What about you? Furious. And I think those are two pretty good descriptors. That outrage, that fear that we were totally off track, and that ferocity, that fear, that fury, thank you. I might need you later. That led to our nation's first environmental laws, right? The Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, NEPA, all of them. And those laws were in direct response to an economy that had overreached from its environment, right? This is not what my grandpa had in mind when, having, commerce and stewardship entwined, right? The economy and the environment entwined. So what we did as an environmental movement is we put procedures in place to stop bad things like this from happening. What we did was we became the great green wall of no, right? We stopped stuff. That was our core competency, right? And we racked up a series of environmental laws that form the basis of our public health in the country today. And that was good. Fast forward 44 years, and just because our rivers aren't on fire anymore doesn't mean we're out of the woods. The biosphere, as I mentioned, is the ultimate closed loop. But we're operating with open-ended accounting, right? And so the market-based decisions that we make every single day, wearing our blue jeans, right, from cotton that's grown in Arizona, and everything else that we do has an impact that we don't see. But those choices serve as a proxy for the world that we are getting. Whether we know it or want it, that's the world we're getting because of the decisions we're making. And so we can't see these flames anymore. We're still in trouble. And it's precisely because we can't see it. Underlining the idea that we can't see a lot of things, I wanted to just show you a couple of pieces here. Now, our predicament, the predicament that we have found ourselves in, is so big that we literally cannot wrap our minds around it. This is the Grand Canyon, of course. The Colorado River, a river strong enough to carve the Grand Canyon out of stone, is no longer strong enough to make it to its own mouth to get to the sea. And that's because cities like LA and Denver and Phoenix take their share of the water, and like I said, the irrigators that are growing cotton or feeding cattle, they get their slice first, right? That's pretty astounding. That's a fixable problem. Not the Grand Canyon. I can't fill that in, but we can get that river to the ocean again. And because we all enjoy cheap food, the Mississippi is so choked with excess fertilizers from agricultural runoff that every year it creates a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, 8,000 miles square. That is 10 times the BP oil spill size. And it happens every single year. Dead zones internationally have doubled each decade since the 1960s. And they're showing no promise of slowing down at all. Now, while individual farming operations keep the profit, if there is any, Grandpa didn't make a ton of dough. Farming is the first organized form of gambling. But this is one of those little untracked things that we keep societally. This is ours to keep until we track it. And long term, that's really going to kill our chances. That's going to kill our chances to grow food in the way that we're going to need to do that. So we need to eat. We need to eat forever. And I want to make sure that you guys know that I don't look at this and I say agriculture is the bad guy. I mean, would I come to Iowa and do that? That's pretty stupid. Actually, I might do that if it was really true. But the fact is, I think that farmers in Iowa and farmers everywhere are caught in a system that's broken. My grandpa didn't wake up every day and think about how he could go hurt Blackbird Creek, right? He woke up and he made a dozen simple decisions every day to keep his operation going, just like his neighbors did. 2 decades after he passed, Blackbird Creek was put on the EPA impaired list of waters for sediment, top to bottom. Top to bottom, despite his stated intention that commerce and stewardship are forever related, right? And so my take is we have a lot of people caught in this paradox. There are a lot of players, not just agriculture. The enviros are trying to do their thing with everything they've got. The regulators are trying to do their thing. The investors, whether they're public investors or private investors, are trying to do the best they can. But we are stuck, and we are not making any gains. What we need is a new framework, a new way of doing business that can allow us to quantify our actions and create gain. the ability to restore our natural systems faster than we degrade our natural systems, and we need to do it while we're creating economic incentives for real people in the real world. But accelerating actions is something that is truly foreign to my community, the environmental community. It's a big shift, and scarier than that, integrating the economy with the environment. I mean, that's fox and henhouse stuff to my group, right? But the system's broken. Landowners have to make decisions based on math. Regulators have to follow rules. The enviros, like I said, the only reason they resort to litigation is because it's the only thing that gets them noticed. And the funders keep throwing good money after bad at a problem that seems not to be getting any more fixed. And so, despite the best intentions, what we have from years ago, all of those rules to keep bad things from happening, are now starting to keep good things from happening. Now, remember, I fix rivers for a living. And I still have to go through the same procedural hurdles to fix a river as a guy who wants to strip gravel from a river. And if we're trying to make gains, that's kind of crazy. Now, several years ago, we were working with a landowner on Oregon's south coast who wanted to fix a single mile of stream. And it was going to take us a single week of dirt work to fix that mile. But we had some funding and some permitting that we had to take care of before we could get the chance to do that mile of dirt work. Who wants to throw out a guess how long it took us to get the chance to do that? How many days, how many weeks, months, years? What do you think? That's not a bad answer. Who else? 1 year? 3 years, 3.5 years it took us to get the chance to do 1 mile of work. So that was considered fast. It still sort of is considered fast. But if it takes us 3.5 years to do 1 mile, I started wondering, how long is it going to take us to fix this? Now, in Oregon, we have 115,000 stream miles. That's about 30 or 40,000 stream miles more than you have here in Iowa, though you have a lot more lakes and ponds than we do. But of those Oregon miles, EPA says 30,000 are impaired and another 50,000 are at risk. Okay, so we have 80,000 stream miles to work with that we've got to get some type of help to. Oregon has one of the most robust systems of watershed councils and SWCDs. We have about 180 entities that are out there working on streams each year. All of us in this business complete maybe 600 projects in a year. Those projects don't equate to 1 mile of benefit apiece. But if they did, 600 into 80,000 equals never. Right? I may as well go be a bank teller or something, because we're not going to fix this problem using the tools that we have had. And nationally, the things aren't much better, right? Nationally, we have about 3.5 million stream miles. After 4 decades of environmental advocacy focused on fixing our nation's waters, we still have 55% of all stream miles in this country impaired under the Clean Water Act. Right? And it's because what we do is we plan, we refine the plan, we act like we're going to do something, we don't do enough, there's a challenge to it, you have to go write another plan, we have to get that challenged, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. And what we're seeing is all these victories on the paper not really adding up to any victories in the water. And so we knew we had to fix this, we knew we had to speed it up, we just didn't know how. Right? So we, of course, started with the river. What does the river itself need? And we figured out that there are only 16 ways to fix a river. Right? 16 ways. There are not 50 ways, there are not 500 ways, there are not 50,000 ways. There are 16 ways. So it's not a science question. We know how to fix rivers. it's not a people question. There are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people working in conservation every day. It's not a people problem. I don't think it's a money problem. I think it's a money allocation problem. But at the end of the day, this is a systems problem, right? You have a bunch of people doing something, working hard, doing their best, and this is what we get, right? We're not putting ourselves in a position to win. All of those 16 ways get caught in a crossfire of permitting and funding and agency regs and procedures and challenges and so forth. And we really can't get any traction. We can't get any speed. So what we did, and we knew nothing about software when we started this, but if you have a highly repetitive set of steps that are leading to a very finite set of outcomes with a bunch of different colors of money, software that's what it's for, right? That's why God invented software. So what we did is we took everybody's regulations, all the design specs, all the permitting specs, all of the GIS work, all of the funding requirements, and we built TurboTax for restoration is what we did in Oregon. And we saw some interesting things, the most interesting of which was we cut about 70% off of project completion time, 70%, while actually improving the quality of the project because we ran everybody through the same set of questions in the checklist, right? And so each of these kinds of projects out there, they're a little bit of a miracle because you have to pull so many different parts back together. Now this is the kind of thing that would be, of course, science fiction to my grandpa. And this tool now available is something that we've got to put to work more broadly. And I think, to you guys that are who here, what year were you born? Either of you guys. 93. 94. What year were you born? 1936. Okay, so this is pretty crazy to you. This is pretty basic to you, right? And so, but it's interesting to see how the world is progressing. And if we have a tool that is suitable to the job at hand, then we should use it, right? Whether that's moving from oxen to horses to tractors to whatever. We've got to start using the right tools for the right time. Now, so this thing gave us pace. Who remembers the second part of my formula? I won't call on you again. Do you remember back to the beginning? I said I want you to think about this. That's pace. Pace and scale. That's right. Good work. You've been replaced. Aren't you furious about that? Yeah, it's just those guys, yeah. All right. So with scale, we have to. The reason we need scale is because rivers operate like veins and arteries, right? You can't have a piece here and a piece here and a piece there in good shape and expect that you're going to be okay. If you want cumulative benefit, you have to have cumulative functionality, right? But that takes money, about $50,000 a mile to actually repair, restore, and then monitor and maintain a project over a 20 to 25 year period. And if you think back to all those red lines times 50,000 a mile means this is a trillions of dollars question, right? Now, the only engine that I'm aware of that has that kind of horsepower, or the horsepower to bring that kind of money to this kind of a problem, is going to be the economy. And that's the original boogeyman of the environment, right? So that is a very scary proposition for the Greens. So the problem with the economy and the environment getting together, and the way it hasn't done so in the right way for a while, is because the money doesn't really properly account for or value the environment, and I would argue that the Greens don't really understand money, right? So what we need is a lingua franca, a common currency, so that these two big things, the economy and the environment, can start doing business. And so the first step to building that was quantifying what restoration is worth. We've heard of the words ecosystem services, and in a nutshell, it's not what the thing is, it's what it does. An acre is just a measurement, but what it does is a measurement of value. And so what we did in Oregon, we brought all the scientists, all the agencies, all of the conservation groups together, and we built an accounting system for the environment, right? And with this, a restoration project like planting trees becomes something more than just a good thing to do for the environment. It now translates into a metric, a specific agreed-upon metric that is worth X amount of shade kilocalories, or Y pounds of nutrient uptake, or Z tons of sediment avoided, right? And these accounting protocols set the table for a wholly new type of transaction. The impacts are pretty easy. We can know those, and now we've got offsets available. So we can set up the trading ratios in a way that every time you do a deal, the environment wins. If you want to do a unit of evil or a unit of negative impact, fine, knock yourself out. It's going to cost you 2 units of good impact, right? Now, that's supposed to happen on my laugh lines. Can you do that next time? All right, so these types of transactions can happen right now. Now, everybody knows there's sort of a common sense limit to the amount of insults that any water body can withstand and still be fishable or swimmable or drinkable. I mean, how many of you, show of hands, have looked in an Iowa lake or ditch recently and said, you know what, I choose to not swim there? Has anybody? I've read the headlines. It's kind of crazy. But under the Clean Water Act, there is a formal limit to all these insults called a total maximum daily load, right? EPA sets those limits and for any waterway, and then anybody with a pipe gets a permit that prescribes how much stuff they can put into that waterway. And because there is a limit, if everybody performs to those permits, you can essentially stay within the fishable, swimmable, drinkable standards of the Clean Water Act. That's why cities are required to treat the water that we send down the drain or flush down the toilet. Now, in the case of Oregon, we're very concerned about water temperature. Water temperature is a really big thing out there because we have salmon. And for those fish to migrate, the water has to be about 58 degrees, which is very cool, but it's what the fish required to have. And since my organization actually listed several of the first Pacific salmon under the Endangered Species Act, we kind of feel like we've got to do more than just keep them on the list. We've got to do enough good work so that we can get them off the list. Anyway, water goes in for treatment. It gets treated. It comes back clean to the waterway, but a little too warm. And because temperatures that are too warm for the fish have to be dealt with under the permit, you got to do something. If you're the city manager or the mayor or whatever, well, that's the city manager. So if you're running a city and you're looking at your impacts from your wastewater treatment facilities, your only option is to build a chilling tower. Big gray structure, capital expense, maintenance and operation for years and years, and ultimately it'll wear out, right? Now, with the new accounting tools and the metrics, instead of building a cooling tower, you can actually go do quantified restoration upstream, right? And because we've set up the ratios at 2-to-1, the cooling towers, if a city has to offset 500 million kilocalories, we'll go out and build 1 billion kilocalories worth of temperature. Because who knows what the biggest input to temperature in a watershed is? Any guesses? What makes watersheds hot? Sun. Yeah, it's the sun. The big bad guy is the sun, right? So build those trees, you can get past that. Now, this isn't just a big idea, right? We have operationalized this in Oregon.
Now, a while back, I heard a story about the Rogue River in Oregon. Every year, the Rogue is filled with salmon swimming upstream to spawn. But because factories were allowing warm water to run back into the river, the temperature was becoming too high for the salmon to survive. So to fix the problem, the town could have required the company to buy expensive cooling equipment, but that would have hurt the local economy. Instead, they decided to pay farmers and ranchers to plant trees along the banks of the river. And that helped to cool the water at a fraction of the cost. So it worked for business, it worked for farmers, it worked for salmon.
So that's pretty cool. I was in the audience when the president mentioned our work, and I nearly got run over by a car telling my wife on the phone as I was walking away. I realized I was in the middle of the street and I had to hang up. But the neat thing about this is not honestly getting mentioned by a sitting president, though that is cool. The neat thing about this is the city of Medford, that was the town that we were working with, they're in compliance with the Clean Water Act. Ratepayers saved $10 million on a $25 million deal, so they're only going to be spending 10 to 12 doing the restoration upstream. 100+ local jobs are created to do the restoration, to monitor it, to maintain it over time. Landowners are getting paid to grow bushels of nature, right? And best of all, the river gets what it needs. Now, I can't call this a win-win because it's a win-win-win-win-win, right? And in the Pacific Northwest, there are 12,000 permit holders just like that city, and there are 200,000 across the country. So what that means is this model has legs. And it has legs in Iowa, I think. The restoration actions that we undertake out there are the same kind that you would have to undertake right here in Iowa to fix the nutrient problems. You would just need to track them differently. We're quantifying kilocalories for temperature. You'd be quantifying pounds of nutrients, whether they're nitrogen or phosphorus. But otherwise, I guess Iowa could, of course, just tell all the farmers to back off the streams, right? As if that's going to happen. Are you guys awake? Where's the cricket? It's of course politically impossible here, and not just here, everywhere, to be honest. And it's legally not required. And honestly, you know what? We don't need to do that. Because most of the problems, most of the issues come from very small amount of the sources. Not every farm in Iowa is a problem farm. In fact, it's probably less than 10% where most of the problems are coming from. Okay? So while on the one hand you might get singled out as a big contributor to the problem, the other thing is you're going to be the one that can provide the greatest amount of uplift. And if we get the mechanics for a market right, you're going to be the one that gets compensated. Now, there are parts of that are unfair in some ways. I mean, there's inequity there. And that's a fight we have to take up with the green community because they're not very happy about it. But look, I'm looking for action. Not talk, not plans, not promises. Action. And so what we do is we look for the sites with the greatest amount of uplift because you're going to spend the same amount of money, whether you're getting 500 units of uplift or 50,000 units of uplift. So you may as well, spend your money smartly. I mean, we're pro-smart at the Freshwater Trust. If there's any one takeaway, just say those guys are pro-smart. But this is a big advantage. What we do is we go in and we look at the red one. This is simple: red, yellow, green. The red stuff, this is where the biggest problems are. The yellow stuff are where we've got some work to do, but there is already some functionality there. The green stuff we're not worried about because it's working just fine. Okay? And so we can use these quantification tools to get more precise in how and what steps we do take. Now, this is, the quantified conservation is a vastly better deal than sort of traditional conservation, but it still costs money. This stuff isn't for free. So who's buying, right? In Iowa, you've got some options. There's the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy. That's a lot of the work was done right here at Iowa State, and it sounds like it was pretty well done at this point. There's an estimate in there of $1.5 billion in technological fixes over the next 20 years that industry and municipalities are going to have to pay to deal with the excess nutrients in the water. My surmise is, using the same mechanics that we did in Oregon, you can probably get the same results for less money, right? If we use green infrastructure. That's very different, but we can track it. Another one, of course, is the public agencies. USDA is a big player. They spend $5 to $6 billion every year on conservation, best management practices, and they need to do a better job of realizing what it is they're getting. They need to make sure that they are getting the conservation outcomes that they're paying for. And we're working with them to try and figure out how they can quantify what those investments are really adding up to. And that actually has a big role to play in the rules that get set as to the EPA. But those landowners that can get in the habit of growing bushels of nature are going to be a leg up for a lot of reasons. Not just because you can get it paid for, and not just because you can get a couple of bucks in the very short term to maintain those, but because I think there's something probably bigger in the offing here. There was very recently a suit out of the Eastern District Court of Louisiana that basically is asking EPA what they're going to do about the dead zone, because the 31 states from which the Mississippi drains haven't done enough, right, to address the issue. So what we'd like to see them do is do a Mississippi-wide total maximum daily load, right? That TMDL that I talked about, basically a numbers-driven permit and market that we can get set up. Because what that would allow is, if you open up trading throughout the basin, if St. Louis and Cincinnati and Memphis and New Orleans and Chicago need to get some nutrient offsets, those marginal acres, and they are marginal acres, at the edge of the field, their value just went up, right, by being grown as bushels of nature. And I think that is something that we have to do, and we're going to have to create the political space to do it. Because if EPA goes through this process, it'll take them a decade if they ever get it done, and it will get challenged by the Greens, by the cities, by the states, and by the Aggies, right? And then we'll go back and we'll write another one. And before you know it, David's already got his kid, and we're not on track. So we can patch and tinker around the issue, but I don't think we have to. The science is here to keep score. The technology is here to allow us to get speed without cutting quality. And if we integrate the economy and the environment, we can actually start getting some real scale. I'm convinced that Iowa can convince. I'm going to take a drink of water right now. Look, Iowa can fix its problems, its water problems, and I would honestly like to see it be domino number one to what I think is going to be an inevitable fixing of the dead zone of the Gulf. But the question is, do you guys have the courage to try? And not just you, people outside of this room. The old saying that you are the ones that you've been waiting for definitely applies here, right? The big reason that I came to Iowa is just to challenge you to stop waiting, right? And, Jackie Robinson, one of my heroes, said that a life is not important except in the impact that it has on other lives. And you have a chance right here to do that. And I really don't understand. Well, I actually totally do understand what we've been waiting for. The world has a deep preference of doing what is known instead of what is needed. I mean, England said in the World War, Churchill said that the Americans, you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've exhausted every other option. And we're getting there, right? So, how many in this room have somebody in your life that you're friends or family with that don't always agree with you? Right. Okay, everybody got that person's got that. Man, that is the most active response this audience has had all night. So you can see that person in your mind right now. Okay? So what I want you to do is I want you to take out your phone. Do you have a phone like this? Look at this, 1936. That's what I'm talking about. So before you leave tonight, if you're up for it, I want you to text or email that person that you just had in your mind. And within 24 hours, you can, of course, use different language. Although most of them won't see Old Corn Bell. I mean, it will definitely be a subject line they don't get a lot of. But see if you can go and have a discussion about what you heard here tonight. And ask them if they'd be willing to assess whether or not we're getting it done as an environmental community, as an agricultural community, as a societal community, cities, municipalities, states, and as a funding community, whether that's public agencies, public dollars, or if you're a donor to conservation efforts. Because the science is here. The science is easy. The problem in front of us, it's cultural. It's social. It's us versus them that's been built up over 4 decades of, I would argue, environmental litigation. Agriculture thinks that the enviros are trying to change their way of life, to kill their way of life. It's not true. The enviros do not trust markets and only trust the law. And that's fallen down too. The regulators are under-resourced and they're just tired of being sued because they got into this game for the same reasons that I did. Right? But they've turned out being a bad guy now. And then the funders, I'm glad I'm not a funder, that's all I can say, because they have not been getting a lot of ROI. So breaking down those barriers starts with conversations like hopefully some of you will have. And if you have that conversation, I'd like to hear about it. My email is right down there. And for those of you that are going to do it, my belief is that you're probably going to be pretty surprised. Iowans are nothing if not practical. And for that reason alone, I think we're going to figure this all out. So I have a couple of minutes for questions that I'm willing to take, and I believe that one of these ladies is going to walk around with the microphone for a few minutes.
I really enjoy what you said, but I'm wondering what effect can this have on the Colorado River, where these cities are just taking every bit of water they can get. I was surprised to see 4 pipes that are like 50 feet across, and they're going all to L.A., taking water to the river, and then it just goes down a couple other cities and the water's gone. How will your ideas here help that kind of a situation?
Everybody hear the question? One of the things, I didn't talk about it directly tonight. We began the nation's first water trust in 1993. And what that does is we go and we work with landowners, irrigators, because out west we don't have water, right? We get far less than 20 inches of rainfall a year, which is what you need to do ag without irrigating. So, but their works, how they use that water is incredibly inefficient. most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. And so what we'll do is we'll go to a landowner and we'll say, hey, you have some excess irrigation water. What if we lease that, we essentially help you upgrade your works to more efficient irrigation works, and that portion that you save, we can put in stream for the benefit of the stream. And we work with leases. Sometimes we do permanent deals, but mostly those are leases. There are water trusts now in 7 western states, and that number is growing. So we're doing a little bit there. The one wrinkle, we have something called a flow protocol, and flow is what we refer to these water deals as. And essentially, again, we talk about water volumetrically, and how it's priced is really about delivery. What we're talking about is what does it do? Because flow can change water temperature like that, right? And so we're putting a number on that, so it's not just cubic feet per second or acre feet. What we can do is say, this is valuable to us in a temperature situation and potentially in a nutrient situation as well. So that's how we're going to, the Colorado Water Trust was founded 2 years ago, and they're just now starting to get going. Others?
I'd like to ask if you do anything with infrastructure restoration upstream for flooding. It seems like in our local area right here that they're more concerned about that than they are about nutrients.
Yeah, you know, we're starting to see, I mean, flooding is a really interesting thing. What we're finding is, and we do quite a bit of river remeandering, and there are high meadows up in Oregon. How we get our water is snowpack, right? So the snow comes down, and then that water melts over the course of a year and releases downstream. What we've discovered is up in the top of these basins are wet, we call them wet meadows. They're huge sponges. They're not quite wetlands, but they definitely suck up a lot of water, and as the year dries out, it all goes down. So that's an example of us working on flooding, because what we did for the last 100 years was we straightened out rivers. We wanted that water out of there, man. And what we're finding out was that's not a good deal. It's not a good deal long term. I mean, we have a lot of folks that use those wet meadows for grazing their cows. And what we found is if you keep the water table high, your protein content in your grass can stay up, and you can put more pounds on your beef faster. But it also regulates flooding, massive flooding. In Portland, Oregon's backyard, we have had the Sandy River. It comes off the flanks of Mount Hood. In the last 5 years, we have had 4 100-year flood events in there because we've simplified the structure of that watershed. And so now we're just in a hurry to get in there and let nature do its thing. Nature is more committed to us. You know, a beaver is a more committed hydrological engineer than the guy that did the wetland that's sitting behind, your favorite box store. And so that's what we're trying to do is find those equivalencies between green infrastructure and gray infrastructure that can help us out with flooding as well as nutrients and all those other things. So the green infrastructure piece is going to be huge going forward.
In Iowa, ethanol plants are very big, and ethanol production, I'm an agronomy major, so I'm not talking this down because I'm from somewhere outside of that discipline, but the production of ethanol is only viable because of the subsidies. And today there's a bigger push for cellulosic ethanol, which is going to harvest everything off the fields. Very few farmers in the state of Iowa are planting cover crops. And my point is, here we have a market incentive to really harm our soil and our watersheds. And it's not going to get any better, because if we go to a cellulosic ethanol and people don't put cover on the land, we'll be having more nutrients flowing into the streams and more sediment. So how can we get the people who provide these incentives to realize that, you're talking about incentives in a way, but it's just going to be counterproductive? How are we going to settle that clash?
Well, I think it comes down to, in my mind, it comes down to truly accounting for things right now. Science is just catching up. The world has long been more complex than we've been able to manage to. I mean, I would characterize humans as we're kind of a maximizing beast, but we need to learn to become an optimizing beast. And the way you do that is you take all of those inputs and you find what's the right output. And once we can quantify, once we can name the output that we want, the outcome that we are after, then we can actually plug in all of those pieces. Right now, what's happening is we have what I would characterize as procedural fidelity disorder, right? Each agency, regulating body, whether they're regulating markets or rules or industry or whatever they are, we really don't do a good job of integrating across those things. So, the ethanol game is separate from the soil game. The soil game is separate from the water game. The water game is separate from the timber game. We've got to bring those together. And I don't propose that we have the single solution here. I propose that we have one of the first steps toward what will be a solution.
You talked a little bit about the Clean Water Act, which I know is concerned with point source pollution. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on how you would regulate non-point pollution, which is a major problem here in our agricultural community.
Yeah, so the non-point sources overwhelmingly are the biggest problem with water in this country and every country. Not every country. The developing world's still jacking around with point sources. But the difficulty in this country is we have shown over the last 4 decades we can't regulate non-point sources. We can put rules on the books. We can come up with nutrient reduction strategies that look good on paper, but they don't do anything. And that's kind of the objective facts. We can't get around that. One could argue that to hang the non-point source issue around the necks of the point sources is patently unfair. And in fact, the conservation community is making exactly that argument, and they want to regulate ag. They want an agricultural management act in every state and at the federal level. Now that's a big fight. I personally don't think it's worth fighting. I would rather harness the energy and see if we can't do a couple of things. The first one is, let's save those point sources that do have to take action. Let's save their money, right? Let's allocate that money the right way. But let's go the next step. Within the total maximum daily load, that limit, there's a portion, an allocation that goes to non-point sources, right? And it's, they're responsible for about 80% of the problem, but there's an allocation right now of about 25% in 15 to 30% in various states that they're not living up to that we know of. USDA spends a lot of money on this, as do several other agencies, and what I would like to see is us quantifying those dollars that they're putting on the ground just to see where we're at. I think it may not be their full allocation that they're living up to, but I know it's more than zero. So I think we have to get into this practice of doing just getting into the habit of quantifying our actions and then tracking our progress and just being honest about where we're at. It's okay that most of this stuff was handed down. I mean, nobody wakes up in the morning saying, "Ooh, I'm going to put the hurt on my river today." They don't do that. They're making implement payments. They're sending a kid to college. So I think we're going to have to walk before we run. And I think regulating ag in the way that most national green groups want to do it is just unworkable and I think unnecessary. Oh, wait, here. Let's get one in the back.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Oh. I just wanted to say I really like your restoration idea, the two goods for one bad. And I think it's great that the public is trying to do the best they can to be more efficient. What do you think we can do as a society to put more pressure on corporations to take up this initiative?
That's a great question, and one that I haven't really figured out, to be honest. I think that unless we figure out this solution, I do believe that there will be a class action suit against agriculture. More specifically, I think they will go after the pesticide companies. There are pesticides present in something like 83% of all America's drinking water today. Actually, like 10 years ago, that was true. And at about 13%, it's over the human cancer rate. So I think there are grounds for a class action suit against those folks that do that, that work in the fertilizer, pesticide business. But I don't think that's the right way to go. I do want to have a conversation someday. If we can get these market mechanics right, I want to have a discussion and say, I'm not here to talk about the class action suit and your legal exposure. I'm not here to talk to you about your sustainability claims or your green marketing. I'm here to talk to you about an investment, because we have a growing market in the Mississippi Basin whereby you can dedicate X dollars and plant trees in the places that will get the highest uplift, or engage in management practices where we'll get the highest uplift. And because you pay for that, you own that credit. And you can pay for it for pretty cheap. And then if Memphis needs nutrient credits, you can make, it's basically a low basis stock play, right? They can make an investment, they can buy low and sell high, right? And so I think that's going to be the one that will ultimately catch the attention of companies that want to diversify still within this field of natural resources, but in a way that isn't maximized, but it's optimized.
We have time for 2 more questions.
So I'm willing to email my brother-in-law,
Yes, what's his name?
Robert. And
This is going to be great.
and I'm hesitant to do it until I can give him some specific information on why he should do some of these things instead of investing in all the tiling that he's been investing in, which is completely antithetical to what we're talking about. So when or how can we learn about some more specific things right here in Iowa that we can offer as that investment opportunity? He is a man who loves an investment opportunity.
Okay.
And he's farming 3,600 acres.
Where?
In central Iowa, near Marshalltown.
You know what? I think there's some opportunities there. We can, of course, there are specifics that we can get into around the program that we've built in Oregon. We've got to build it here. Part of the reason I'm here is to figure out whether we've got some uptake. But we're talking with USDA and some of the other players in the state. Let's exchange information before I go.
Thanks a lot. Tomorrow I'm going to put in another string of tile.
You're fired.
And the only thing that it's going to do is take care of some of the nitrogen. It won't do much for the other things. What I will do is run that into a leach bed of wood chips at the end of the tile. It'll go into those wood chips, and that supposedly will absorb the nitrogen, let the nitrogen change to a gas, and go back to the atmosphere. And then the rest of the water, as time goes through, the water will continue on without the nitrogen. But nitrogen's only part of the problem.
Do you have a question? I know there's a question in there somewhere. I just didn't hear it.
Am I doing the right thing?
It sounds like you're doing the best that you've got on your hands. Right now, these mechanics are not here. for us. And if you wanted to go out and do something that's sort of top of the line, super duper, that'd probably take us a while to get put together.
This isn't off the top of my head. This is through Iowa State.
Yeah. No, I think you're pulling out the nitrogen, as you say. Whether your net is everything that you would like it to be, I don't know. I mean, it's really hard to tell. My blood pressure didn't go up at all when you told me that story, if that's any indication.
Okay, we are out of time for questions, but you can join us for reception in the back and ask your questions then. It's over by here. Please join me in thanking our speaker.